Welcome to the Deep Dive,
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deep Dive, Emerald City Hockey Seattle Kraken podcast. RJ, it's good to be back with you, even though we're both in different locales for this one. But I'm excited to continue talking about potential coaching candidates for the Seattle Kraken. A couple more names have been linked to them since we last talked about coaching candidates for the team last week. Also excited to talk about some other stuff, including the big news from today. All right, here's the thing, everybody. We all know Deep Dive Curse. Breaking news for the Kraken drops after we record the deep dive. What we are starting to find out now, though, is with the PWHL Seattle team, it's the opposite. They tend to break news right before we go here and start recording the deep dive. So we have our first information about the expansion draft and the expansion process for PWHL Seattle that we can talk about and discuss there, RJ. And then also we can talk about things like offer sheets and what the compensation levels are going to be for offer sheets and what offer sheets we think the Kraken might be able to go out there and potentially make this offseason if Jason Botterill decides to go in that direction. So I'm really excited to talk about all that stuff, RJ. But of course, the biggest thing in the hockey world is the Leafs losing last night in yet another Game 7, this one at home. And RJ, if you were a member of the Florida Panthers and you've got to go and do media availability after taking out a team in their 7th consecutive Game 7 loss, what do you say?
You know, I don't know exactly what I would say. I wouldn't probably go with this weird kind of like gaslighting tour that they're going on, talking about the Leafs fans and how, maybe it's really their fault that the Leafs have built this really good team, but it's just, if not for all the pressure and everything in this market, they'd probably go a lot further. I'll have a lot to say on that on the Red Glare. Like, we can get into this because I think it's very interesting, but maybe it does make sense strategically. But I would say it's probably something other than that. But it is very interesting response by the Panthers. Although I think about the response from interviews right after the game, and Seth Jones, somebody who we have 2 photos with at various NHL drafts,
Yep.
Was asked about, you just joined this team, what makes it so special playing with these guys? Like, what is it about this team aside from just being a bunch of dogs? Which I thought was interesting for the question. But yeah, I mean, what is it about that team? They are congrats Dylan, to your Cats for being a bunch of dogs.
Yeah. No, they've got it. They're going to another Eastern Conference Finals. We'll see how long this ride can actually go for them. I'm not too optimistic about their chance against the Canes, but yes, this group of cats is really a group of dogs. And if you're ever bitten by a dog, you can contact our great sponsor, the offices of Rico Tessendor, personal injury attorney, at ricotessendor.com or 425-778-9800 and get a free consultation on that event. Obviously, hope that never does happen to any of you out there, but that is a different example that we tend not to talk about of Rico's potential services and what he can help you out with. And so it felt like a kind of a natural after we heard that question last night to talk about it here. And again, while we hope none of you ever need his services, the odds say at some point someone out there will be involved in an accident or something like that, like a dog bite at work or anywhere, on the road, anywhere in between. And when you are, we hope you call Rico at 425-778-9800 or visit his website, ricotessendor.com, for that free consultation. Again, Kraken having these interviews with coaches, all that kind of stuff. We've talked about this before. It just makes sense. Get all the information that you can whenever anything happens to you is generally the best course of action. And I genuinely believe that. He's won millions of dollars for his clients and helped thousands of people in the greater Seattle area. And as a fellow member of the ECH community, we know he'll help you too. So if you're like the Leafs, get bit by the dog, call Rico.
And I actually just remembered a story from the other day where, like, might have to call Rico moment. And it was with the dog thing too. This can happen. Real quick, just because it's a funny story, I think. My dad's got this buddy who, well, not really, I don't know, guy who talks to him.
Hey,
who
we
I
all have dads. We know that their personal friend circles are small.
yeah.
That is generally how they run.
Yeah, he talks to him while my dad maybe tries to like go somewhere else. But he got this really expensive dog, like this, and I forget it, like tens of thousands of dollars he paid for this dog, according to what I hear. And I met the dog the other day. We went to this little like car show and met the dog, and the dog is just like barking and jumping up and down. And like I thought I might get bit, but really, especially at my dad. And the guy who has the dog, and we thought this is an expensive dog. This dog should be trained. What's going on here? And he's like, no, it's you're walking. You're uncertain when you walk. He told my dad that's the problem. Everybody else they don't, but you're uncertain when you walk. There's like there's some uncertainty in the way that you're walking. Like there's a fear in you, and that's why he's going after you.
What a thing to say to someone.
I know.
There's a fear in you. I mean, you could say that about, members of the Leafs.
Well,
Like,
that's
I know
I
you were
connected it, right?
Yeah, but that does make sense. But yes, that is
So
something. Yeah, no. Again, everybody, as a dog lover, don't need to go and spend tens of thousands of dollars on a dog. Go, best dogs I've ever had, all rescues. Cost
yeah,
like $100.
So yeah, on the list: 1, rescue; 2, I guess be certain when you walk and confident.
Yes.
And
Do not
3,
walk with fear. That's the big
yes, do
lesson
not
to
walk
take
with
away
fear.
here.
And then I guess if you do happen to walk with fear and do get bitten by a dog that has a problem with that, call Rico.
Definitely, definitely. Oh man, if and hey, if you're a Seattle area Leafs fan, you have also been harmed by the Leafs.
Yeah, we know some of those. Yeah.
Get that free consultation. I don't know that how much Rico will be able to help you, but you can have the conversation. All right, RJ, let's dive into coaching candidates because that is obviously the biggest story right now in Kraken land, which is, I think, what we should start calling things. That's my big new addition for the off season. What do you think?
Is this a theme park?
Yeah, I want it. There's not enough of them in the PNW. That is probably at the top of the list of what I miss about SoCal.
Okay. Well, it's a pretty good theme park because we've already had this roller coaster ride in this and a coaching carousel
Yes.
for you to enjoy here. As the Kraken have, reportedly looked at several candidates, some of them off the board now. I mean, last week we really did our deep dive into all the different coaching candidates, or 8 that we thought were most likely. And we have some that are off the board already, notably a Rick Tocchet, who goes to Philadelphia. And I think he was probably the top guy on both of our lists as far as the people we talked about. But we also have some new names that we hadn't connected to the Kraken or the reports hadn't come out yet. And so we can address those now. And there's 3 new names. So I guess let's just take stock of kind of where the coaching search stands here. Sounds like the Kraken had a lot of interest in Rick Tocchet. Tocchet goes to Philly, although John Shannon also disputed any reports that Tocchet had interviewed in Seattle or that they had offered him the job, which I found kind of odd because he also then disputed that Tocchet ever interviewed in 2021 with the team, which that seemed to be that was confirmed by multiple sources that he interviewed multiple times. So I don't really believe that.
Some revisionist history there in the great oxymoron that is Kraken land.
I know. Yeah, exactly. So I don't know where that
I just realized after I had said it too, I was like, oh, Kraken land, that lines up about as well as these guys trying to take shots at empty nets.
Oof.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, try to get back on the rails here.
The Leafs trying to win a game 7. Is that better?
that
can more universally get behind that one.
Yeah, we got to not make this podcast entirely about the Leafs. I'm sure we could do all tie-ins here, and we'll get there later. But anyway, looking at the coaching search, so reportedly the Kraken had some interest. Some reports even that they offered the job to Tocchet. He turns them down. He goes to Philly, and so then you get this next kind of tier of candidates where they have been connected to Mitch Love. They have been connected to a David Quinn, who we mentioned. They have been connected to a Don Granato, who we mentioned. They have been connected to Jay Leach, who we also talked about last week. But the new people that have been brought up by various national reporters, there's 3 names. It's Jeff Blashill, Adam Nightingale, and Marco Sturm. Those are the 3 new names. And so I guess before we get into those guys and talk a little bit more about them in depth, Dylan, how are you feeling about the coaching search in general as the Kraken kind of move on to this next list of coaches with Rick Tocchet out of the picture?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's what we were expecting. Like this is kind of, what we've been talking about with this job is that it's been a difficult coaching market this off season. You talked about that pretty, extensively last week on the Red Glare over on patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey, how, there was not a lot of high-end coaches available this off season, but there were a lot of vacancies. And so a lot of teams have been going out there and there's just a lot of competition. And unfortunately, for where the Kraken are right now, they're not, realistically going to be at the top of a top coach's choices, for destination. So I think as for, the fact that we're talking about more and more names and the names that are being brought up, I'm not surprised. I think that I definitely have preferences amongst all of the different people that we have talked about and are going to talk about today. But, look, I do feel like the Kraken are kind of, at this crossroads. We've talked about this before about wanting them to pick a direction as an organization. Are you going to try to rebuild and kind of continue going in that direction? Are you going to try to be more competitive right away? When you are in that kind of no man's land where you have to figure out the direction of your team, it makes sense to me that you would go out there and you would get as much information as possible, talk to as many people as possible, talk to people that would be on kind of both sides of that fence, and then make your decision once you maybe find the individual that you believe the most in after having those interviews. So I'm also not surprised that, we would hear that the Kraken would be connected to so many different individuals during this search.
Yeah, I think you want to do a pretty wide coaching search, especially in the coaching market this year, where I think some years you just have your guy, you try and zero in on them, do whatever you can to get them. I think we saw that at the very top of the market, like with Mike Sullivan going to the Rangers, where that just felt like a foregone
Yeah.
conclusion. And with Rick Tocchet a little bit too, where he was kind of the top guy in the market. Everyone put in their bids, and he chooses Philly. But now I into a level of the coaching search where you want to do a very broad search and look at a lot of different names and figure out which direction you want to go. And also it makes sense too, because some of the names that you're looking at, particularly a Mitch Love, who I think is probably top on both of our lists at this point, as far as
Definitely.
available, reasonable guys they could get, were still busy. They were still coaching until very recently, until the Capitals got eliminated a few days ago. And so all the reports said that Love was able to very briefly talk with teams, but you couldn't really bring him in for a full interview while he's in the middle of the playoffs coaching. And of course, that's very understandable. Same thing with Vegas and maybe their assistant coaches getting eliminated as well. So now you can talk to some other people. I don't think any other head coaches are going to shake loose from playoff losses at this point. If you get to the conference finals, you're probably pretty secure. I
Yeah.
think all four of those coaches are going to be fine. And of the coaches that were eliminated, I don't, Bruce Cassidy's going to be safe. And I don't see why any team that got to the second round would be eager to get into this coaching market and get rid of the guy they have.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think that that's going to happen. So I think we know what the field is. And again, as the Kraken continue to talk to people and we hear about that, we can just kind of discuss what we think that they would bring to the team.
Yep, exactly. So let's not waste any more time and dive right into the names here. So of the new names, shall we start with, I mean, I guess, who do you want to start with? Do you have a preference?
I mean, let's start with Blashill just because I do think
Yeah.
that that is probably the name that most people have heard of realistically,
He
just because
has
he
the
has.
most coaching experience at the NHL level.
Exactly, exactly. So Jeff Blashill, former coach of the Detroit Red Wings. Don't have the exact dates in front of me right now. I have different things about him in front of me. But former head coach of the Detroit Red Wings during their rebuilding years, I guess we'll call it. This was a group under Jeff Blashill that I mean, they just did not perform well. Objectively, like they were at the bottom of the standings most years, basically every year, and yeah, it was a tough situation. Now, how much of that was him, I think, is extremely debatable because it was a roster that needed young players, it needed young stars to be added. They needed to go through that difficult rebuilding process. So a lot of losing seasons is to be expected when you're going through a process like that, and that's what ended up happening with him. I think where things start to turn is that I think that Detroit was extremely patient with him, and they did not see a lot of growth as they were going through that rebuilding process with him. You did emerge after the Jeff Blashill years with players like a Lucas Raymond, Mort Sider, all that kind of stuff. Dylan Larkin really coming into his own as somebody who can lead a team, but I don't know that all of that growth happened really under him or with him, and we can get more into that. But I want to let you kind of give your first impressions on him.
Yeah, I mean, my first impressions, I look at the results as a head coach, but you also look at the situation as well. And I did find myself kind of wanting to make some excuses for him just because of the situation he was in. When he took over, the Red Wings were at the tail end of a incredible streak, 25
Yeah.
consecutive playoff appearances. And I think there was an emphasis in the organization to try and keep that streak alive as long as they could. And so it did delay some of the tough decisions they really had to make as far as going into a rebuild. And ultimately they do decide to do that, get really bad for a little bit. And so Blashill, gets kind of the brunt of that as the team was in his first really 2 or 3 seasons kind of trying to hang on and still be competitive, but just not good enough to make the playoffs. And then they really do bottom out toward the end of his tenure. But he does get 7 years. I mean, he was the coach from 2015 to 2022. It's a 7-year stretch as the head coach. And as you mentioned, the young players specifically didn't really develop all that well. There are some exceptions like, Dylan Larkin. He does get a young version of like Moritz Seider and Lucas Raymond. We can get into the development. But after that, he does go to the Tampa Bay Lightning as an assistant coach. So he's been an assistant under John Cooper for each of the last 3 years. Also worth mentioning, he did win a Calder Cup as the head coach of the Grand Rapids Griffins in the AHL before taking that Red Wings head coaching job. So that's just another thing on the resume for him.
Yeah, and that is important to note there. 7 years is a long time. That was longer than I remembered it, but yeah, I'm looking at it now. Yeah, I think for me, like, look, he's only 51. I think that somebody in this spot probably does deserve a second chance under different circumstances when you're not, again, trying to guide this team that talk about dynasties, right, and having golden years and all of that kind of stuff was going through something that they hadn't had to go through in like in a quarter of a century, right, where they had to kind of start over and really go through that process. And I think that is a difficult thing to do. I think it's a tough spot to be in if that is not just your first NHL head coaching opportunity, but also up until this point your only NHL head coaching opportunity. He was extremely young when he had to go through all of that too. So, I do think that, yeah, under different circumstances, I think we probably see different results with Jeff Blashill. That being said, yeah, for me, it's the growth of the young players, and I know that you can point to Dylan Larkin, but Larkin was inconsistent during those years as he was coming up. Some of that is on injury. I don't want to discount that, but he really comes into his own as a superstar for me in the years after Blashill, and that's also when like his two-way defensive metrics start taking an upswing and things like that. And for me, the biggest thing is when I was looking at the 5-on-5 underlying numbers for this Detroit Red Wings roster, looking at it, a couple years prior, and then the last season that Blashill was coach with them, there wasn't a lot of growth or change, right? Like they were a bottom 5 team in most categories, and they stayed a bottom 5 team at the end. There was not some sort of upward trajectory. There wasn't a lot of growth there. And for me, that's concerning. And that's something that I look at, because like I get it. Your team is rebuilding. You've got to bottom out. There's going to be some years of pain there. The team's not going to be good. Totally understand that you would have years in the bottom 5, but I would have liked to see towards the end there some signs that you're starting to come out of it. But like bottom 4 in Corsi for percentage, bottom 4 in high danger chances percentage, just at 5-on-5, there just was not a lot of growth there during his time. And that includes young players like Lucas Raymond coming in and putting together a great Calder campaign, Sider coming in, putting together great Calder campaigns. Like he did have those young players in there. Only coach to make Bertuzzi look good during that time in Detroit, really. So like there are some positives there, but for me, there just wasn't enough of that kind of upward trajectory for me to maybe get excited about, like, if he's going to come to the Kraken and work with the young players and try to, take them on that slow and steady approach.
Yeah, I'm with you. And also working with a lot of high draft picks. I mean, the Red Wings had a ton of first, second, third round picks that didn't really pan out or reach their potential. I mean, I could just list year by year: Dennis Cholowski, Michael Rasmussen, Philip Zadina, Joe Veleno. None of those guys really end up reaching their potential. And you could even look at the second round picks too, a bunch of guys who probably a lot of listeners haven't even heard of, just because they didn't really pan out. And so I think that's a problem with the organization's development. You can question how much of that is him specifically, but I think he plays a role in it, or it could also just be bad drafting. But you can kind of explain away different things. But with Blashill, ultimately, I just see another coach, and he's not the first one on this list of guys we talked about between last week and this week, where you look at the resume and you basically are trying to explain away failures. And I don't really want the Kraken to hire a coach where that's how you have to look at it, where you have to try and see, okay, yes, there was failure, but like, is it all his fault, really? I would rather they go with somebody who has done something impressive that speaks for itself. And the question is, okay, can they just translate that success to Seattle instead of somebody where it's like, okay, they've failed in the past, maybe they can do better here. Maybe it wasn't entirely their fault.
Right. I mean, look, that's the ideal, and it should be the ideal, and it should be the standard. But this is where we come around to the question, and this has kind of been the question this whole coaching search, which is there's not that many candidates that have that, right? That check that box. And the ones that do, are they going to be interested in this job? Right? Like there's a chance, we certainly have hope that a Mitch Love would be interested in this job just because of all the connections to the Pacific Northwest, being right there, being, having played in Everett, having started his coaching career in Everett. But, realistically, again, because of the roster, because of the way things have gone in Seattle, because of the fact that they're, whoever they hire is going to be the third coach in 3 years, it just isn't the prime destination for those kinds of coaching candidates. And I just don't know that you're going to be able to necessarily find that person for this job this go around.
Yeah. And so I'm trying to be realistic here about what their actual options are. And so that is important to kind of remember as we talk about this coaching search, that yeah, they're not the most desirable landing spot here for coaches. And as I said last week, they may even be the least desirable landing spot. And so you do have to work within that framework. And it's something that Jason Botterill has to deal with, something that, maybe is not entirely his fault. He's kind of been handed this. And so he has to kind of just try and find the best option there. So going from Jeff Blash, unless you have anything else to say.
Yeah, I mean, I do, as much as we talk about that stuff, and like obviously this is based on the tone and things we're saying about it, this is not one of our preferred candidates. He's not going to necessarily be high on our list if we had to rank all these people. I will say, like, again, he was extremely young. He's still pretty young, 51, right? He's been working under John Cooper. I do think that there's a very good chance that things would be different for Blashill whenever he next gets an opportunity to be a head coach in the National Hockey League. And so it is one of those where, again, if we're talking about Kraken are not going to necessarily be able to grab those more highly coveted coaching candidates, it does become a game of looking at maybe people who did have a rough go of things their first time around and trying to see who learned the tough lessons the hard way, who has really internalized those lessons and then could come back with a new opportunity, apply what they learned, and kind of grow from there. And look, that is something that does happen in coaching. There's a lot of coaches that have gone on to become really good coaches that started off their career as head coaches really rocky. Like that is not an unheard of proposition. It's just about really finding the people that learn those lessons and internalize them and has a plan for how to address maybe their weak points moving forward that you want to kind of be on the lookout for. And that just comes down to the interview process.
Yeah, and learning under arguably the best head coach in the NHL, John Cooper, the last 3 years is only going to help you, I would imagine.
Definitely.
Now, one more thing to mention on Blashill, though, is he has been very closely tied to the Chicago Blackhawks. And
Yes.
to the point where it was almost seemed like all but confirmed a few days ago, going into the weekend. Still a little premature on that, according to Elliot Friedman, but probably I would think the Chicago job seems a lot more likely for him, given the reporting, than Seattle.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So going from Blashill to actually somebody who has worked with Jeff Blashill before. They were together on the 2019-20 Detroit Red Wings coaching staff, actually the 2 years prior to, and it's Adam Nightingale. So Nightingale was a video coach.
About Dan Bilesma there, RJ.
That also fits as well. Dan Bilesma was on that staff. Jeff Blashill was the head coach. Adam Nightingale, an assistant coach. Dan Bilesma, an assistant coach on that staff. So maybe the Kraken just have a thing for this 1920 Detroit Red Wings coaching staff.
I mean, I hope not.
Yeah, I hope not too. If you look at their record,
if you're looking at just results, you would say I hope not.
Yes, they were 17, 49, and 5, the worst team in the salary cap era. But let's gloss over that for right now, and look at Adam Nightingale, because that's really not the part of his resume that I think we're looking at here as far as a coach here, because he does have that, but most recently he has been at Michigan State and had a lot of success there over the last couple seasons. And Dylan, I know you've paid a little more attention to Michigan State recently with your sister going there. What have you seen from Nightingale as a coach and what he's done with that program?
Yeah, I mean, this program has gotten to be, one of the most desirable programs for recruits, for transfers, for people now able to leave the CHL and sign commitment letters to for next season, including briefly for the Kraken. Tyson Jugmouth had signed to go there, but then ultimately decided to sign with the Kraken, which he was ready to sign with the Kraken, so that makes sense. But has really turned that program around, really turned it into just a prime destination for players from all over the place. I mean, bringing in European players as well. Artem Levshonov, who was the second overall pick last year's draft, was picked out of Michigan State, playing for him there, coming over from Europe. So in that sense, it's super intriguing. Obviously, has a great personality, good track record of working with young players. I think that's really important. And I think just the work that he's done, not just there at Michigan State, working with younger developing players, but also with the U.S. national development team as the head coach there prior, I think is also, a big thing to look at. You go back even further, about a decade ago in his coaching history, and you're talking about being head coach at Shattuck St. Mary, of their 14U AAA team, which is, if you know anything about the legends of hockey and people like Sidney Crosby, Nathan McKinnon, all those guys, that's a huge deal that he was a part of that organization and coaching at that school. So he does have a very strong track record at this point of working with young and developing players. And I do think that makes him very intriguing as a potential hire for the Kraken, because I do think that he's somebody that relates to them very well, understands how to communicate to modern young athletes in a big way, and is able to form strong relationships with them. And I think that would be a nice thing to have for a player like Shane Wright, who has had to go through like 8 coaches in 5 years, and a Matty Beniers, who is now going to be on his 3rd head coach in 4 seasons of NHL hockey, and all of those kind of young and up and coming players that the Kraken are going to have, a Yanni Newman, who's going to have gone through a bunch of coaches. I do think him having that personal side of things with young players specifically, I think is a potential big positive for the Kraken. As for the on-ice stuff, Michigan State has gotten to be a very competitive program. They've been winning a very difficult Big Ten conference the last couple seasons, not quite having the success on the national stage. I know national championship has kind of been what they've been aiming for. They haven't been able to really get there yet, but it's also only been like 3 years, and he's completely turned this program around. So there's enough success for me there that I would be interested.
Yeah, and I think he falls into the category of a younger coach. He's only 45 years old as well, who can kind of grow with the team and develop the younger players. I think he certainly checks that box. We talked last week about kind of the boxes we're looking for a coach to check here. And I think he is, maybe the guy that they might be looking at that is in that category of coach. I think the other guys, maybe they're looking at somebody who could have some prior experience. Blashill, 7 years as an NHL head coach, somebody who maybe hopefully could turn the team around right away. Not to say Nightingale can't do that, but I think as a first-time head coach in the NHL, especially coming straight from college, you're probably going to have some growing pains
Mhm.
immediately. That's just, again, nothing against him as a coach. That's just something any coach in that position is going to deal with. But I think it might be better ultimately for the Kraken's long-term future going with somebody like that versus a retread who doesn't work out. If there's a retread who's learned their lessons and is coming back in as a second time coach and ready to get going right away, that could ultimately be best. But if you're not picking the right guy there, maybe it does make more sense to go with the Nightingale who can help the younger players develop. It seems consistent with the slow and steady, build it through the draft approach that Ron Francis has talked plenty about. But the team's kind of contradicted that as well, talking about wanting to be aggressive in the offseason, go for it right away. But this seems to be more consistent with the slow and steady approach.
Yeah, I would say if you're going to hire somebody like Nightingale, give him time, right? Give him runway. You don't necessarily need to give him 7 years of runway like Blashill had in Detroit, but I would want a solid 3 or 4 years for him to really work with the core that you're putting together and let not only them develop, but also him develop as an NHL head coach. Because yes, not only are you getting first-time head coach at the NHL level, and so you're going to have the growing pains there, but you're also getting somebody who just doesn't have a ton of NHL coaching experience either. We mentioned the assistant coach under Blashill in Detroit for that 1920 season. Prior to that, only 3 years of video coach experience at the NHL level. So there's just not a lot of NHL coaching experience with Nightingale, and that is something that maybe concerns me a little bit. Again, I think all of those positives of working and developing with younger players and the relationships he's able to get to form with them and help them grow with probably outweighs those concerns. But it is one of those things where if you're bringing him in and you expect results year 1, year 2, I don't know that you're going to necessarily get them with him, but I do think that your younger players are going to be better for it. And so again, it's very much if the Kraken go with him, I hope that they pick the direction of the slow and steady and focus on that young core that they're putting together.
Yeah, and I think if he is ultimately the hire, I think that should say a lot about what the team views as their actual timeline to compete. I would hope so, yeah, because if you are trying to just foot on the gas, go for it right away, this is the wrong choice of coach. Just because there is going to be an element of learning on the job there, but he could still ultimately be,
or at least it seems like it from the outside. Like there is the chance that he is not, but that would be surprising.
Yeah. So that is Adam Nightingale. And also another thing worth mentioning, according to the reports, Elliot Friedman talked about Nightingale, I believe, first linked to the Kraken, but then also mentioned pretty much immediately after saying he doesn't think that's going to happen. He thinks it's unlikely. And I've seen other reports also suggesting that the most likely outcome is that Nightingale stays put at Michigan State and continues with building the program he's built there.
Yeah, we talked about this on the live game commentary, I think it was. And it does make sense. Nightingale has been a Michigan guy forever, from Michigan, played in Michigan, all of that kind of stuff, Michigan State forever. It does seem like, especially now, it's only been 3 years. He's got the Big Ten championships back to back. He wants to win a national championship there. It does seem early for him to maybe give up on the program that he's building there. And if he was, it feels like if Detroit wanted to go in a different direction at some point in the next couple years, that would maybe then be the logical place for him to go. He could stay in Michigan, only be an hour away from Lansing, all of that kind of stuff. So I don't think it's super likely, but I think he would be a really intriguing pick for the Kraken, and it would say a lot about kind of where they're thinking about taking things.
Yeah, agreed. I just don't know if it makes the most sense for him right now, especially if he wants to stay close to home. But speaking of close to home, and I guess, home as far as where we came from, right? Yeah. The next coach candidate here that's been linked to the Kraken is Marco Sturm, who was the LA Kings organization since 2018, most recently, and currently is head coach of the Ontario Reign, their AHL affiliate. And Sturm has been in coaching conversations for the last few years. It feels like his name has kind of been thrown around really ever since 2018, I think. Really, that would be the time when he won a silver medal with his home country of Germany in the 2018 Olympics in Pyeongchang. And impressive performance there as a coach. I mean, there weren't NHL players in that Olympics. If we remember, there were I think it was, the NHL was not allowed to compete.
Yeah.
But Germany still impressive performance, taking Russia to that gold medal game. They almost had it too.
Yeah,
I
they
think like
did.
Russia
It
had a
was a
big
really close
comeback in
game.
that game. But impressive coaching performance there. Since then, he was an assistant coach with the LA Kings from 2018 to 2022, and then head coach of the Ontario Reign from 2022 to right now. So Dylan, initial thoughts on Marco Sturm? Because I know last week he was on your list of honorable mentions when we mentioned coaches that were not originally on our list, but someone we might like. Why was he on your list there?
In part just because he's been talked about so much, and yeah, we weren't really able to get to everybody there last week, but he was one of the names that I had, just because he is just so highly thought of and respected. Every year when the coaching carousel gets going, his name gets brought up, it gets mentioned, basically like that teams like him, they think highly of him, they respect him a lot, but he never seems to land a job. And so at some point, I don't know what that really means and what that says. I will say from looking at, structure and working with the young players, particularly since he's taken over in Ontario, just because we do see them a decent amount with the Firebirds playing them quite frequently down there in the AHL. You look at his teams, and I do think that he's done a good job of running a structured system, right? And we talked about last week how important structure is and all of that stuff, accountability. I think he'd be a good coach for all of those things. um, I I think he's done a good job of helping develop and kind of right the ship with a lot of the Kings prospects. You and I have talked many times in the past, whether it's been here or over on the Patreon pod, about the growth of a lot of those prospects that the Kings had that were not developing. Right, Rob Blake had many dart throws at the top of drafts, and those players were just not coming along. But I do think that it's not entirely a coincidence that once he takes over in Ontario, Quentin Byfield's able to kind of right the ship. Turcotte's maybe able to right the ship a little bit, or as much as he possibly could there. The Ferrier able to right the ship and become good, productive pieces that the Kings were able to use to great effect this past year up at the NHL level, working with a Brant Clark as well at the AHL level, Sturm. So I do think that there's something there for him helping develop these players, get them ready for the NHL in a way that other coaches had struggled to do. And so I want to give him credit there. And I think that he kind of creates this intriguing combination of structure and systems with working with young players. But given the results that the Reign have had and the fact that he hasn't been hired, I am left to wonder, is he really good at those things, but just maybe not quite at NHL level yet?
And it's a fair question to ask, I think. When you look at him not having gotten an NHL head coaching job yet, I think a lot of that is results-based. And yes, he is very young. He's 46, so he hasn't had a ton of time in the coaching world after retiring as a player, and a pretty good player in the NHL too, by the way. Spent a lot of years with the San Jose Sharks and Boston Bruins. But I think you look at the results. We'll start with his first tenure as an assistant coach with the LA Kings for 4 years. And he was in charge of defense and the power play. Interesting with a former NHL forward being in charge of defense and the power play, but that's what he was in charge of. And so defensively, they were kind of near the middle of the league in expected goals against, kind of middle to lower. But those teams, weren't the most competitive just as a team overall with the roster. But I also look at the power play he was in charge of, and the results here, league rank, they were 27th, 26th, 19th, and 27th in the power play during his time there as an assistant coach. And so that's not really a whole lot to write home about. Nothing all that impressive as an assistant, but he has done a good job as the head coach of the Ontario Reign, and given them some team success and done a good job helping the prospects, building the culture there. Decent results. I mean, they lost in the second round a couple of years ago. They lost, I think, in the first round of the playoffs this year in the qualifying round 2 years ago, and so. Okay, it's fine, but it's not great. And so I could see a situation where Sturm, people are talking about him. He's well respected. He's well thought of. But when you look at the list of coaching candidates, he's probably not in anybody's top 3. He's probably in a lot of people's top 10 or so, but not in anyone's top 3. And if you're only hiring one coach, that would explain why he hasn't been hired.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's just kind of been it. And And like I said, it's kind of a difficult spot because, we talk about wanting somebody who can maybe work with the young players and help them develop, and that's going to be crucial for the Kraken's success. Whether they want to take a slower approach or not, you're going to need somebody who can work with Matty Beniers, Capo Caco, Shane Wright, Yanni Newman coming in, maybe a Berkeley Catton being added to the mix next year, Riker Evans and his continued development, Ville Otavainen if he's able to come up and join the third pairing, right? Like, you do need somebody who has experience working with young players, or preferably they would have that experience working with young players, because even if the Kraken want to take a step forward next year, those are all guys that are going to be, to an extent, prominent parts of your NHL roster, and they need to perform. We've also talked about wanting more structure, more systems work, and all of that stuff, and we felt like that has been really where the Kraken have had a lot of difficulties these last 2 seasons in particular. It's just, like I said, it's there with him. Like, you can see it. I could talk about it for a long time. Like, the systems work, particularly defensively. He has become a very good defensive coach, the way he's been able to work with the Reign and work with them as far as, getting shots to the perimeter, opening up sight lines for goaltenders. All of that kind of stuff has been great when you look at what the Reign do. But the results haven't been there. And, earlier we were talking about, like, ideally you would want somebody who has had some of those results. And for whatever reason, it just hasn't necessarily come together for him while he's been a member of the Kings organization.
Yeah, and so as a candidate, he's the kind of guy where I would think, maybe teams would want to think, okay, just give it another couple years, and see if he's able to get the results that can come with that.
Yeah, again, because of his age, I think that there is something to be said for that. Now, real quick, RJ, I want to mention one more name. And, I was looking at the comments from last week's deep dive, a lot of comments, loved all the engagement from everybody. I tried to respond to as many people as I could that brought up some names. But one name was brought up from Schultz. So shout out to Schultz for bringing up this name. And it was DJ Smith, former head coach of the Ottawa Senators. And things didn't go great for the Ottawa Senators under DJ Smith's time there. Obviously let go, 2 years ago, mid-season, and then they brought in Jacques Martin to finish out the year, and then they eventually move on to Travis Green this last season. But when I was digging into DJ Smith's tenure with the Ottawa Senators, obviously they were not able to make the playoffs. They were loosely competitive, I guess we'll call it, in the sense that they won games, but again, we're not able to make the postseason, as Afra is just destroying my tower of pillows that I'm balancing my laptop on right now. But when I looked into Disc Jockey Smith, which is apparently his real name if you go to Wikipedia right now, I did notice something. And this goes back to what I was talking about with Blashill, which was, if you look at like kind of, 3 or 4 years prior to Blashill's last season with the Detroit Red Wings, there was virtually no growth anywhere for that team. If you look at the Ottawa Senators from when DJ Smith took over to when he left, there was a lot of growth, particularly when it comes to the analytics, the 5-on-5 numbers, the underlying numbers for the Ottawa Senators. While they were still not a playoff team, there was marked growth from them to the point where they were in a lot of categories a top 10 team in the league when it came to things like 5-on-5 Fenwick 4 percentage. When you look at high danger chances percentage, they're top 10 in the league. When you look at scoring chances in favor of a team, they're 12th, right? Like, they were able to get up there in just about every category that you can think of. They had a great power play that was in a top 10, 23.5% on the power play. Great power play. They're up in the top half of the league in the penalty kill. Like, they were doing good work, or at least playoff level work, everywhere but converting on chances, basically. And really, it was the high danger chances. They just could not convert. Their shooting percentage was too low. They were also running through goaltenders, but that just feels like Ottawa forever. So I won't hold that one against him. But I was really intrigued by that. And I thought, hey, this is somebody, again, similar to a Blashill, similar to any of the candidates we've talked about coming from Buffalo. You could very much kind of explain away the negatives just based off of being a part of an organization that virtually nobody has made work, right? There was lots of issues with the organization under that previous management, under the ownership group, right? Lots of stuff hanging around and over everything that could have contributed to that team not becoming a playoff team. But when I look at this actual stuff that DJ Smith could, you could very much stick to just DJ Smith. I was like, team actually got better every year he was there. And I think that that does count for something. And I think that we haven't really seen that with some of the other coaching candidates. So I do want to shout out DJ Smith as somebody who maybe if you get a second chance somewhere else that is not as dysfunctional as maybe the Ottawa Senators, he can go to work and after 2 or 3 years, maybe turn the Kraken into something.
And he's someone who I think I kind of dismissed just given the tenure in Ottawa and how things didn't
It was a
work
mess.
out. It was definitely a mess. And so he's another one of those guys where you ask, okay, well, how much of that was his fault? And I think you do make a good comparison with Blashill where Smith has a lot more you can look at as far as the underlying numbers being better versus a Jeff Blashill. And I think there's a lot of similarities too there with, I mean, DJ Smith, you look at the Senators teams he was coaching and the very top players, were 20 years old. Tim Stützle, 22 by the time he left, Brady Tkachuk. And same thing with Blashill toward the end of his tenure, right? Where Seider and Raymond were about that age as well. But I do think the Senators results were better in that time. And I mean, you look at his last full season with the Senators, they ran through 7 goalies. They had 7 goalies play for them at some point that season. And none of them were all that good for, more than 2 or 3 games. And so I think that is something that you could look at as a reason that maybe it was his fault. Wasn't his fault. But so if you're looking at coaches in that tier, yeah, I think DJ Smith, he's as good as any of them. I still feel like looking at these list of names for me anyway, and you can tell me if you disagree, but I feel like the coaches really of the ones that are left that have been linked to the Kraken, it's kind of in 3 tiers for me. You have the top tier that is just Mitch Love by himself. You have the next tier, which is coaches that are fine, acceptable, okay, they could be all right. And then there's a few names like, please don't do this. But that's kind of where I'm at in the coaching search. I think there's really only one name left of the ones that have connected to the Kraken that excites me at all, and that's Mitch Love.
Right, and that reasonably, I bet a lot of people are in that boat. I'm in that boat with you. It's really turned into, again, looking at candidates like we're talking about with many of these guys, where it's going to be their second crack at the NHL or their first crack at the NHL, and trying to find things to look at that can give you some hope or understand where the team would be coming from if they hire them, and ways for them to build. And like I said, with DJ Smith, it's maybe a little easier than with some other guys. But that is what it's going to come down to. And again, that's going to be the big challenge for Kraken management and Jason Botterill, which is going to be whose vision do you trust? Who do you think has learned those lessons? Who do you think in a different set of circumstances is going to be able to give different results? And that becomes the person that you're going to go with. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see who that ends up being.
Yeah, same here. And before we move on, one more thing on DJ Smith that I wanted to mention too, because he spent this last season as assistant coach with the LA Kings. They had the fewest expected goals against in the entire NHL for money puck. DJ Smith was focused on, he was on the defensive coach.
Yeah.
Defensive side of things. So if you're looking at someone to fix all the defensive issues the Kraken had this year, pretty good resume there.
Yeah, again, possession numbers only ever got better under DJ Smith in Ottawa. The stuff with the Kings this year was really good. Thank you for bringing that up. I did have that and I forgot. He's like I said, dark horse candidate maybe. I don't know. Schultz, shout out to you for bringing him up. I wouldn't have thought of him at all, but once I looked into him, I was intrigued. RJ, moving on here for the last bit of the podcast, the PWHL sent out a media release this morning to me and not you. So canonically, the PWHL does prefer my half of Emerald City Hockey, apparently. But because I reached out and added myself to the email list. Anyway, we do have our first ideas of how the expansion process is going to go down for both Vancouver and Seattle here. And so I'm going to read out how this is going to work. So June 3rd is the first date that is going to come up, and that's going to come up here pretty soon. And that is when player protection lists are due for the existing PWHL franchises. Each of those 6 inaugural PWHL teams is going to have the opportunity to initially protect 3 players from selection in the exclusive signing window and the expansion draft. After those teams have lost 2 players, either due to the signing window or the expansion draft, they will then be permitted to protect 1 additional player. Okay, so my first thoughts on this, RJ, it's not a lot of player protection.
No, it's not. This seems quite favorable for Vancouver and Seattle.
Yes. Now, players eligible for protection must either be under contract for next season or the team must hold their playing rights for next season. And if I'm not mistaken, the PWHL, a lot of contracts are just 1-year contracts. So that does kind of limit the field of how many players were going to be, eligible or they were going to realistically lose anyway. So I do think that kind of comes into play a little bit. But I was surprised by how small those protection lists are going to be, and it does bring up interesting decisions for some teams to make, especially if you've got a good goaltender. Like, or potentially with all of these teams, they might have to dedicate one of those spots to a goaltender too. So then you're talking about even less skaters that you could potentially keep around.
Yeah, no, I mean that is interesting as well. I mean, I'm surprised. Well, I guess I shouldn't be so surprised that it seems so weighted toward the expansion teams. But I if I'm an existing team too, I might be a little worried about this.
Yeah, I would be worried. I would be worried. The next thing that happens is the day after those protection lists are given on June 3rd. On June 4th, a 5-day exclusive window for both Vancouver and Seattle is going to open up, in which both those teams can sign a maximum of 5 players. So basically, they just get an extra 5 days, early access to the player signing window, to free agency, where they can go out there and sign some players and start putting together a squad. And those would become the first 5 players for these organizations. So I do think that is, they have a maximum of 5 players that can sign during those 5 days. So those groups will become the first 5 players for each organization. And then after that, the day after that window ends, on June 9th at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, we will have the 2025 expansion draft presented by Upper Deck. They paid money for it. I'll say it.
Yeah.
And this is going to feature Seattle and Vancouver selecting a minimum of 7 players each until each team has reached a 12-player roster. So again, full roster would be 23 players. They're only going to get to 12 players during the expansion draft, and then the rest will be filled out later between the entry draft and further free agency. So I do think that is interesting. If one of the teams enters the expansion draft with fewer signed players than the other team, it will be granted additional selections until they get to 12. So if one of the teams does not sign 5 players during that early signing window, they will be granted additional picks in the expansion draft. So that's also going to be interesting, RJ, to see how teams manage that. If they favor players on rosters a little bit more than available signees, might see that play out.
Yeah, there's some strategy there. I assume those additional picks would just be at the end of the expansion draft, right?
I would assume so. It does not say in this. It says the order in which teams will make their selections will be determined at a later stage. Coverage details to be announced. Doesn't say, but I would assume that would be the case. And then, yes, I was getting to that. And then on June 24th at 7 p.m. Eastern, we get the 2025 PWHL draft presented by Upper Deck. It will be a 6-round draft for all 8 teams to select eligible players from a pool of talent, including recent collegiate graduates and/or players from other professional leagues. Did say that the New York Sirens will pick first in the entry draft based on the gold plan system that the league does operate under. So Seattle will not have the opportunity to pick first unless they were to trade New York for that opportunity. I'm fine with that, by the way. I think that New York earned it, right? Especially under this system. I know a lot of people are interested in the NHL adopting. They did actually earn it. So I'm fine with this. We also do not have an order as to where the expansion teams, though, will slot in. I am very curious, RJ, and I'm wondering if they kind of go with the model of, maybe expansion teams pick second and third, and then that they alternate each round, and then that order will be determined based off of the opposite of who gets first pick in the expansion draft.
That's what I would think, and it's something that the NHL has gone with in the past. I know recently with the draft lottery in the NHL doing that system, the expansion team gets the third best odds, and so that's kind of the area you'd think to put them. And yeah, the alternating picks just make sense. And then I think the last time the NHL had a pair of expansion franchises, they did a coin toss to determine which team got to choose to go first in the entry draft ahead of the other one versus the expansion draft. So, and I think the entry draft was much more valuable. I think that was
Yeah.
the Minnesota Wild getting Marian Gaborik versus the Columbus Blue Jackets getting Rostislav Klesla and then some goalie I don't remember in the expansion draft. So I think the entry draft's probably more valuable.
Yeah, well, it certainly is at the NHL level because the expansion draft, because the protection lists are so small in the PWHL. I do wonder if after knowing that, if it might be more valuable to go the expansion draft route, or if one of the organizations might determine so. But happy to have this information, especially because we're coming up pretty quick on like when those protection lists are due. But I'm just really excited, and I'm liking everything I'm seeing so far.
Me too, and it seems like PWHL Seattle is going to have a competitive team right off the bat. I mean, this is a great spot for whoever their GM is going to be. You can sell, I mean, first of all, very few protected players, but then also you have this exclusive negotiating window, and you can sell these players on A+ facilities, great arena, great place to live. Like, it's going to be such an easy sell. I feel like you can attract a lot of talent.
Yeah, I got to think that you're going to be able to go into that exclusive signing window and be able to put together as good a squad as you want to. Again, be interesting to see if teams decide that it's worth getting the maximum of 5 players. I don't know like whose contracts are up this year on all of that kind of stuff, but it's going to be interesting to see how both organizations decide to handle this. But I'm really excited for it, and I'm also excited that we're not going to have to wait that long. I mean, really, all of this is going to be wrapped up in just about under a month. Right?
Yeah,
a month and a week, 5 weeks.
Yeah, in about 5 weeks, we should know which players are going to be on PWHL Seattle that we're going to be able to go to Climate Pledge Arena and see play in person.
Yeah, and who they'll have taken in the entry draft to be excited about. All of that stuff's all going to be done in the next 5 weeks. So I'm really excited about all of that, RJ. And I know a lot of people have been looking forward to that information, and they've already been going crazy with it over on the Discord this morning. So it's been really great to see all of that. Now I'm going to hand it over to you, RJ, to talk about offer sheets. So get a different form of some of the similar stuff, right? As far as GMs having to make decisions.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm all about talking about GMs having to make decisions and roster moves and all that stuff. So last Tuesday, offer sheet compensation tiers were released by the NHL for this year. And I know that probably doesn't sound all that interesting of a topic, but it does provide more clarity for the Kraken this offseason. And one of the avenues that will be available to them to attract players to the team and try and get better. And so real quick rundown on how offer sheets work. I think I've gone over this in the past, but just very quick refresher for everybody. And this, I'll be leaving out some details, but for restricted free agents, so usually those are players under the age of 27, teams still retain rights to those players when their contracts are up. But one way that you can get those players, if you were another team, is to sign them to an offer sheet. So that would be offering them a contract. The player has to agree to that contract. And then at that point, their existing team, the team with the rights to that player, has the opportunity to match that contract that you've just signed. And they're free to do that. They can match it. They can keep the player. But if they don't, you can potentially get the player and give them a certain amount of compensation for that player, depending on how big the contract is that the player has signed. And so the information released by the NHL is the tiers of compensation that are due based on the cap hit of the contract, the AAV. And just going to the Kraken, I think the only relevant sections are really on the higher end of this list, because I think if the Kraken are going to utilize an offer sheet this offseason, it's going to be to get a difference-making type of player on their team. I don't think they're going to really look at a lot of lower-tier players to offer sheet because they have plenty of depth forwards. We've talked about this. They have the depth. They need that big difference maker, that star player. And so I think there are only maybe 4 players who could make any sense for the Kraken to go after with an offer sheet based on the level of talent for that player. I think you only want to look at forwards. They have enough defensemen. They have enough money committed there. But you look at the top RFA forwards this year. And of course, the name that's been mentioned, I think more than any other, is Matthew Nyes. And realistically, I think he's the only one of the 4 that makes sense for anybody to offer sheet, because you look at the other 3 and it's Mason McTavish in Anaheim, Marco Rossi in Minnesota, and JJ Peterka in Buffalo. And the issue with those 3 is that for all 3 of those players, their teams have plenty of cap space to match any offer sheet you could throw at them, where their teams aren't going to be cap strapped at all. You could sign the player to an offer sheet. They're just going to match it. You're not going to get the player. It's pointless to do that. And angered the team that you've done that to as well. So I don't think any of those three make sense. But Matthew Nyes is a different situation because the Maple Leafs, potentially a cap-strapped team. Of course, they do have Mitch Marner, whose contract is expiring. They have a lot of money coming off the books. But if they're going to re-sign him, they're going to be very tight to the salary cap, and they may not be able to afford an offer sheet on Matthew Nyes. So let's look at what an offer sheet for Nyes might look like with the compensation tiers that we have now. So it escalates up from no compensation on a contract at like 1.5 million or less, all the way up to 4 first-round picks, which is a lot of compensation due, and that's for contracts with an AAV over 11.7 million. And there are specific numbers. It's $11,700,192, but I'm going to round it off here so we can kind of have more basic numbers to play with. And I think the offer sheet that would make sense for Matthew Nyes, because if we look at the projections on his contract from AFP Analytics, and I don't have it up right now, I'm trying to pull it up, but I believe it's in the like high 6s, low 7s range.
I was thinking around 7, yeah.
Around 7 on a 7-year deal, I believe, for Nyes. And so with an offer sheet, you do kind of have to overpay because you have to give a team the incentive not to just match it. You have to actually, make it difficult on the team that you're targeting not to match it. And so, yeah, it's 7 years times 7.22, according to AFP Analytics there on the contract projection. And so if you look at the offer sheet tiers, there's a tier that goes up to 7.02 million. That's first and third round picks, but I think they match anything in there. The next tier goes up to 9.36 million. And I think that's the tier to target. That would be a first round pick, a second round pick, and a third round pick. And I think you want to go up to the very highest level of that tier in order to dissuade the Leafs from matching it. So what that deal would look like is it'd be a 5-year contract times 9.36 million, and we'll just cut it off there. But 5 times 9.36 million is what that offer sheet would look like. And the reason it's 5 years rather than 7 or a longer term deal is because of the way that formula is calculated. If it's a longer deal than 5 years, then it is just divided by 5 years. So if you go to a 7-year deal times 9.36, that's going to be a lot higher in terms of compensation. You're probably going to find yourself having to give 4 first-round picks, and that's not worth it. Even as good as Matthew Nyes is, that's probably not worth it. So you're targeting that tier. And I believe a 5-year contract would also walk him right to unrestricted free agency. So that's another reason for Nyes to potentially want to sign that deal. It's probably more than the Leafs would offer him, and it walks him right to UFA. And so that would be a reason for him to take that deal. And so the compensation would be a first, a second, and a third round pick. They would all be next year for the Kraken. So 2026, first, second, and third, and they all have to be their own picks per the rules. So thank you for letting me give the little explainer there. But now we know essentially what that offer sheet would look like. I'd be very surprised if it looked any different if the Kraken were to do it than 5 years times 9.36. So I'll let you speak for a second here, Dylan. How would you feel about proposing that offer sheet to Matthew Nyes? Would that be worth it for the Kraken given the compensation?
I think just to be able to add a player like that, I feel like that is the one way that the Kraken could make this work, right? And do I think Matthew Nyes is a superstar that deserves over 9 million AAV? I don't know. Maybe it's a bit of an overpay salary cap world, it is an overpay. But realistically, when you are limited in being able to add those players to your organization, right? Like the only other way to do it is to try to lure them in unrestricted free agency, in which case they're also several years older and you have to worry about that sort of thing. And you're still going to probably have to overpay them to join this roster, or trade for them, which they generally are not available via trade. Most teams aren't looking to trade young pseudo superstars like that. Or you tank for several years and you accumulate extremely high draft picks, like top 4 picks, for a couple of years, and one of them becomes that player. Given that those are the only ways you can really end up with somebody like this, overpaying in an offer sheet and paying Matthew Nyes maybe 1.5 million more than he's maybe worth, it doesn't sound so bad.
Yeah, and I think it sounds pretty attractive. Look, here's my opinion on it. I think some teams should do it. I think it makes a lot of sense for some team to do it. My concern with the Kraken is that you have to give up your own draft picks. And next year's first round pick for Seattle, look, I mean, we got to be honest. They were bottom 6 in the league this year. If things don't work out the way they're hoping next year, I think there's certainly a potential for it to be bottom 6 or 7 next year. There's always that risk.
Yes.
And in a draft that has a generational player in Gavin McKenna, and you're giving up potential odds to get a player like that, that could be very dangerous. So it's a very risky. 100% sure that you are going to be better than that next year if you're going to make a move like this. So that's the risk involved. But I think it makes a lot of sense value wise for some team to do it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Somebody should do it. Whether or not the Kraken or that team, time will tell. We were both very impressed with him this postseason and what he was able to do with the Leafs. So, like, as far as the skill set,
I love the player.
Yeah, we know he's skilled. We know he can elevate his game for the postseason, play a playoff style hockey, all of that stuff. It does feel like maybe one risk too many for at least this offseason for the Seattle Kraken, unfortunately, or for both of us. Or if you're gonna bring him in, you got to be absolutely sure that he's going to make enough of a difference that you're not going to regret not having that first round pick.
Yeah. And it might all be a moot point because it sounds like through the reports that he's not really interested in signing an offer sheet, but also if the Leafs were to let go of Mitch Marner, if he were to go somewhere else, they're going to re-sign Knies to whatever it's going to cost. And so that offer sheet will be, I think, completely off the table.
Yeah. All right. So closing out the podcast, because you brought him up, Mitch Marner, RJ, what are the odds?
Very little odds of coming to Seattle, I think. I think the Kraken are going to make him a big offer this offseason. I mean, Dylan, after watching Game 7 with Toronto getting eliminated, the fans booing Marner whenever he touched the puck, which, by the way, I can't think of a more a thing that Seattle fans would be less likely to do. Yeah. Something like that, knowing Kraken fans booing their own player like that. That's just wild to me. But anyway, chances are he might go somewhere else. I'm sure he's going to listen to offers from around the league. And I think the Kraken certainly should be interested. And we discussed a little bit before the podcast how high we would go on an offer on a 7-year deal. You may have even gone a little higher than I did. You were suggesting max deal, which I then reminded you was $19.1 million cap hit. You backed off of that.
I asked what the max was. Okay, I wasn't all the way there yet. I wanted all the information.
Okay, fair enough. So you were never suggesting max deal. I certainly wouldn't do that. But I think, look, the projection for Marner on a 7-year deal is about $13 million per year, according to AFP Analytics. And so I think the Kraken would probably have to go higher than that, because I think there are going to be other teams that are going to be able to offer in that range and would be willing to offer in that range. And we talked about it with the coaching search, right? Seattle just isn't that attractive a destination for whether it's a coach or a high-end player who is going to be able to get top-tier money from a team who's probably positioned better to win now. I mean, I look at Vegas. They have the money to give him a big offer. Mm-hmm. It's also a income tax-free state, so that kind of levels the playing field there. That's one advantage Seattle would have. But I just think he's going to have other offers out there, and I think it's unlikely. As far as how high on an offer I would go, I'd probably go up to about 14 and a half on the AAV.
I think the Kraken would have to go to 15 for it to be considered.
I think so too. And I would think about it. You know what? You look at the other options that are out there. I'd much rather spend 15 on Marner than 9 on a Brock Besser. Like, no question.
Yeah.
So that's he's probably the best they can do if they're trying to turn things around right away this offseason. Signing Mitch Marner is the best possible single move I think you could make. But it would be very expensive. It'd probably be an overpay relative to his value, but I just think it's probably the best option that you would potentially have. But I still wonder if it's even an option they'd have. I just doubt he would come to Seattle.
Yeah, I would put the Kraken odds of getting Mitch Marner at 0. Like, not even like 0.1%. I just think it's straight up 0. I think if he leaves Toronto, he's going either to someplace close to Toronto, because keep in mind, he's a Toronto boy from the GTA. He was born and raised a Leafs fan, grew up dreaming of being a Maple Leafs player, groomed by his dad to be a Maple Leaf. Like, everything for this kid has been the Toronto Maple Leafs. If he's leaving Toronto, it would be to either stay close to home and play in a Detroit or a Buffalo or something like that.
Chicago have a lot of money.
Chicago's going to have a lot of money, and he can play with Connor Bedard. Or he's going to go somewhere to win immediately and try to stick it to the fans that kind of ran him out of town, in which case I think you go to like a Vegas or a Carolina, and you just, you get your revenge that way, and it's worth it to you. But I don't see any scenario. He's already got plenty of money. He's going to get plenty of money. I just don't see any scenario in which Seattle could make money the motivating factor to the extent that it would take to make him come here.
Yeah, it would be something at that point that I think the Kraken just wouldn't be willing to do. They offer that max deal at 19 mil. Maybe he's listening.
It'd be tough not to, yes.
Yeah, but I still think there's just going to be other considerations on the table, and everybody's going to be interested. It's just going to be so hard to compete. I mean, even if you are a team like Vegas, Carolina, Chicago, there's going to be a lot of other teams that can offer a lot too. So I would put it maybe at 0.5%. I'd still give it something other than zero, but it's pretty close to zero.
Yeah. That being said, RJ, maybe to make the PNW a little bit more attractive, to make the Kraken organization a little bit more attractive, they should bring in Rico to talk to Mitch Marner, right? Nobody's been hurt more than Mitch Marner in all of this, right? Like, let's be real. It's been pretty brutal. We talk about the Leafs fans maybe feeling like they're owed something. Mitch Marner, poor guy's just been leaving it all out there. Every regular season after regular season, he's been leaving it all out there. RJ, trying to help the Leafs win, and as you talked about, the boos, all of that kind of stuff.
The throwing jerseys on the ice during play. I mean, if he slips and falls on one of those jerseys, which by the way, that is dangerous. Kraken fans never, ever do that.
Yeah,
they wouldn't, but just
beer thrown onto the bench during the game too. Like they're throwing beer at the guys on the bench. Like ridiculous stuff from Leafs fans this last little bit. But Rico, it'd be the two-tiered approach, RJ, because come at it as a Kraken fan, explaining how great Kraken fans are. Rico is a season ticket holder, a great member of Kraken Nation, right? And then also being like, hey, look, anybody messes with you, I can help take care of you. So just saying, Rico might be our secret weapon in trying to lure Mitch Marner here.
Yeah, I like that. Maybe get the odds above the 0% that you have. We'll see what Rico can do.
Yeah, and if you want Rico to ever be at your side the way he could potentially be at the side of Mitch Marner, you can reach out and contact Rico. If anything ever happens, he can be at your side just like Mitch Marner at 425-778-9800 or visit his website, ricotessendor.com, to schedule a free consultation. He's won millions of dollars for his clients and helped thousands of people in the greater Seattle area. And as a fellow member of the ECH community, we know he'll help you too. Thanks so much for listening, everybody, and we will see you all next time.
Hey everyone, before we go, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey, especially our Terror of the Deep patrons.
Thank you so much for making all this possible. We really appreciate your support.